I'm Deputy Jonathan Reniff. I'm the Chair of the Hospital Facilities Review Panel.
Deputy Steve Hire, Vice Chair.
Deputy Alex Curtis, Review Panel Member.
Deputy Karen Wilson.
Lars Troy, Councillor St Clement, and Planning Member.
Minister, perhaps you could introduce yourself and your team. Deputy Tom Binney, Health Minister.
Deanne Bratch, Interim NHF Business Lead.
Andy Skate, the Chief Officer for Infrastructure and Environment.
Jessica Hardwick, NHF Programme Director.
Good, okay. We've got 2 hours scheduled. I'm going to start, Minister, if I may, with just an opening question on whether you could provide us with an update on progress. Any significant developments that have happened recently that you could provide us with just an update on progress?
And the only substantial development, obviously, has been the submission of the planning application, which has been processed and is now open for comment. Okay. So that's the most recent major development.
I think it was stated in that planning application that delivery had slipped to 6 months. Could you elaborate on that?
I think what that means is, from my understanding, is that the construction may well be finished within 2028, but the commissioning process is going to take several months, and that could run us into 2029 before it becomes operational. So there's a difference between when the last brick gets laid and when the first patient moves in. So there's a whole commissioning process which will take several months, but I'm happy to hand over to...
I think it would just be useful to have clarification on what changed.
That can actually detail that.
I don't think anything's changed. I think that in the article itself, it talked about the fact that the programme really was a function of the contractor that we might well get involved with, and at main works down the line. Obviously, we've set out a initial timeline from the start. We've been talking about an initial timeline, especially for that kind of second phase of the programme where we have construction going on, because it's going to be a function of how somebody might choose to develop the site. And I guess if we could constrain ourselves. We could say to the contractor, this absolutely must be delivered and operational by the end of 2028. In doing so, we're setting a constraint. And so at the moment, it's hard to understand why we might set ourselves such a constraint. Operationally, we know we want to deliver as soon as we possibly can. That's what we've been doing. That's what we've been working very, very hard to achieve. However, we've always said that there's going to be some flexibility in terms of the programme down the line, in terms of the delivery stages.
Okay. Shall we move on to the first section? I thought you were taking that. Karen, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Minister, the commercial case of the outline business case contains information about the procurement approach to be taken by the team. At the last hearing, you referred to formalising the procurement process for the programme. Can you provide an update on the status of this procurement process for us, please?
Yeah, well, I can say that as you know, in terms of local procurement, there's been a programme of engagement with local contractors, and the team have in recent months been engaging with UK contractors. The detail of that, you're much better off listening to them to update you fully on what they've been doing, so I'm happy to hand over to either Jess or Deanne to
Thank you.
fill in the gaps.
Yeah, so I think that the procurement strategy has been something that we've been very openly discussing with the local supply chain, with the wider supply chain. We know the more people that we can get excited about delivering this programme of works, the more commercial tension that there might be. But we also understand that there's a balance in that. Obviously, more time we take up of contractor time, that's more time that they've got to commit to bidding, and the more concerned that they might get about any particular programme, because it costs them money to start really intensely engaging with us. So the strategy is, as we've previously set out, we've been doing some soft engagement. It's turned into, some more formal engagement, which is obviously the prior information notice that's been issued. As a consequence of that prior information notice, there'll be some webinars where we talk about the programme. We set out some outline procurement strategies in terms of when we might anticipate that there might be an invitation to tender, which would be towards, well, firstly, there'll be a selection questionnaire, PQQ, a pre-qualification questionnaire type period for a couple of months. We're hoping to get feedback on what the procurement should exactly look like. What we're very aware of is that the healthcare market in the UK and worldwide is quite unstable. You'll know that there's a very large main contractor in the UK who stopped operating recently. You'll also know that a few years ago there was one that stopped operating. We're not really in ideal waters for procurement at the moment. So obviously what we're trying to do is take feedback and design whatever process we have to work really well with the market so that we can get as many attractive bids as we possibly can.
What changes do you think you will need to make to the strategy that you've got at the moment?
So it perhaps won't be the strategy itself insofar as in general terms it's going to be very familiar because we are a public body. We're bound to follow, good practice in terms of procurement and all of the procurement guidelines that they are in the UK and certainly enshrined with our PFM, within the procurement toolkit, all of those things. They very much define what we can and can't do. I suppose it will come down to the detail of that and things like contractual terms, things like how long we might work alongside somebody before we might be able to agree on a fixed price, what that fixed price looks like, how fixed it will be, if there's elements that we can fix because they're quite certain, and there's elements where there might be some risk. And so if we try and fix that, either we're going to pay more money to fix the risk, or people are just going to say, no, I don't really fancy that contract, thank you. So it's all of those sorts of things that we are hoping to solidify more, I suppose, within the next period as a consequence of the questionnaire that will follow, the prior information notice, the webinars that we have. That will help us better mould it so that the procurement process itself can be as attractive as it possibly can be.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, I just want to come in with the engagement with non-Jersey contractors. What level of engagement have you had with non-Jersey companies?
So I'd like to be really cautious here because we are in a procurement process, and obviously there are rules around procurement processes that mean that people want commercial confidentiality. People don't necessarily want to have in a public forum, but in essence, all we've done is presented the scheme, we've recorded those meetings so that there's a good record of those meetings, and we've started to have initial conversations around those things that I've just pointed out that we understand are risks to the market at the moment, in particular with very, very large construction, especially healthcare construction projects.
So I'm not after the names of any companies, but I think what we're trying to get to the bottom of is the balance between off-island and on-island. Do you still anticipate that this will be and the main contractor will be an off-island contractor?
So we have a prior information notice out at the moment that's open to all comers, and anybody can participate in that process. And, I believe lots of people are.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you confirm if any contact has been made with particular contractors in the UK specifically? Have you targeted that particular market at all?
Well, there are frameworks that exist in the UK for healthcare services. And obviously, since Brexit, there are different rules around procurement in the UK. So perhaps some channels that would have been open to us previously are not open as a consequence of that process. But we've obviously, somebody gave me the wise advice of trying to make your own luck. And I think that what we know is that we have a large scheme by anybody's standard to deliver on the island, and we want to maximise the number of people who are aware of that opportunity, aware of the opportunity of working in Jersey, because it's a fantastic place to live and to work. And obviously, we really, really need these healthcare facilities delivering.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So have you actually specifically talked to some of those contractors in the market to actually provide the context? Have you had prior discussions with people about what it is you're trying to do?
Yes, so I think in answering Deputy Menoff's question, I have indeed confirmed that there have been individual conversations with parties who are interested.
Okay, are you able to give us an idea of how many interested parties?
I really honestly think that might compromise our kind of procurement process by disclosing that at this stage. Of course, there'll be opportunity.
Or is it less than
I really honestly, I think I don't think it would be right for me. I'm not sure if anybody else would disagree with that, but I do think there'll be opportunity down the line to be able to disclose that information. But right now, you know, our aim is to absolutely maximise the number of people who are interested through our prior information notice, and that's ongoing. And you know, today, there may well be people listening.
I just wanted to say that between us, I'm comfortable with the approach that's been taken. If that helps to, yeah, it's been explained through to me, and I think the approach is entirely appropriate given the circumstances. If that helps.
Andy, did you want to say?
No, I was going to say, so there is interest, as we'd expect. I think we're in a position of, we've got to encourage interest because we are, there's a big hospitals programme in the UK, clearly under review currently with the Labour government.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of big companies who build a lot of big things, especially health facilities, who are looking at that programme. We've got to also raise our flag and say, we are here again, and I think that's the dilemma we've got. We've been on a journey here with this particular project, but part of a programme of possibly, you know, we're number 4 now. You see, so we've got to re-engage with the market again, saying we're back. We've got something that's very deliverable. We've got something that is now currently in planning. We are confident about our position. And then we've got to re-engage with the market again. So there is interest.
Thank you. That's
and
really what we
there's
were trying
interest
to
in the UK,
establish.
and there's certainly interest locally. So we're hoping for some form of blended solution, I think, as we move forward. But that will all come out in detail as we go through this process.
Okay, thank you for confirming that.
So you do not have, just to confirm, you do not have any preferred bidders in mind. You have not reached any prior agreements with anyone. There is nothing in place at all at the moment.
No, we're not at that stage yet. No.
Could you just remind us when the closure of the information notice, the prior information notice deadline?
It's the 24th of October for the PIN, yeah. And then obviously the webinars and then the information questionnaire follow on after that.
When you go and see people, do you have a standard contact method? You know, do you talk to them with the same information, you know, wherever they are, whoever they are?
Yeah, so we've got an information pack that we share and talk around, and as I say, all of the conversations that we've had with parties are recorded so that we have notes of those meetings. We're very mindful that we have to tell everybody all the same information, which of course is part of any procurement process. It is, there's different stages in procurement, and I guess this stage is getting people excited about delivering on Jersey, and that's what we've been seeking to do.
Thank you. Can you just reassure or tell us how you're going to reassure potential bidders that there will be no particular bias in the procurement process? I think to Andy's point about you trying to generate interest and how that might be perceived in terms of your approach.
I think the key thing is consistency of information giving to all parties, being really clear what the process is, being very transparent about how to engage, where to engage, what to engage with. And as Jessica said, we just need to ensure that every party has the same information. So we're not picking A over B or B over C. You know, we are all ears at this point in time. Really, we want to encourage contractors to engage with us at all levels. So there's a lot of work that we need done. But we're all ears, so at this point, the best thing for us to be is very open, transparent, get that information back from people, and the next series of events through webinars, and it's just basically more information sharing, really.
Okay.
They will, people out there will say to us, yes, we're interested. That sort of puts their marker on the table, really, and then that allows us now to have some more further conversations after the notice closes, and there'll be a lot of questions they will ask us about where we are, what it is, and how, especially if they're an off-island contractor, how do things work here? They'll also want to understand what the on-island contracting capability is, because that's a sensible thing for them to understand. So again, I think it's going to be a period of a lot of information sharing. We'll receive a lot, they'll receive a lot, and then we get to the sharp point really about, okay, well, after you've heard all of that, are you still interested? really. So.
Can I just add?
Is there any particular learning from the previous iterations that you have applied to the way in which you're approaching this particular procurement
I
process?
think there's always learning from the previous projects. So certainly the immediate previous project, the Our Hospital scheme, was a much bigger scheme. So the size of the scheme invariably means that there are some of the issues that are magnified. So I think we're continually assessing how things went previously, either in number 3 or number 2, and what that really means. So I think it's probably an iterative process, Deputy. So I know Jessica wants to add something.
Thank you, Andy. Just to add to that point, you'll understand, because of where we are on the 4th scheme that we've tried to deliver, that we've probably been equally optimistic about at this stage. Some of the contractors have asked us directly, have you got a favoured partner? So I do suspect that there might be people in the market who might be suggesting that there is a favoured partner, but that's certainly not any conversation that we have had on behalf of the programme. We've made it very clear that we are doing things very differently this time as a consequence of those lessons, as you say, from those previous proposals. We've absolutely set up a different team than we have previously. You'll know that we have a lot more Government of Jersey employees on the scheme. That's a decision because we are civil servants. We look after the public purse first and foremost, and that's always in our mind. We decided not to get contractors involved quite so early because we think, having done this before so many times, actually the experience, the expertise sits with us at this stage. Of course, there's benefits from having contractor involvement. Early contractor involvement is very, very important. And we know that, it's one thing to design a building, it's another thing to build it. That's why part of our team has been that construction advice. And of course, we can also look back to all of those previous projects where we've had that construction advice, and members of our team have been part of that contractor effort and so understand that different dimension of thinking that needs to come to the proposals. So I'd like to say there's been lots and lots of lessons that have been learned by previous procurements. And I think part of that is also trying to have a very open tender process. Actually, historically, I think people felt that they had to form partnerships with local contractors in order to do work on the island. Now, we're not saying that that might make sense, but what we're saying is we don't want to limit ourselves. We want to, as we were talking about earlier, have open as we possibly can be, minimise the constraints, because as soon as you have a constraint, you'll have a contractor pricing risk, and risk then costs us money. So it's all of those strategies that we're really trying to bring on board.
Just going to say we've got a lot of questions to get through, so if answers could be...
I'm sorry, there's a lot to say.
No. Oh, sorry. No, I'm okay.
Alex.
We were going to move on to just specifically around engagement with local contractors, because of course the panel understand that part of the phased approach in the new healthcare facilities, one of the benefits highlighted would be greater engagement with local contractors. So please could you provide an update about engagement that has taken place between government and the local construction and supply sector following the November 2023 construction forum in relation specifically, of course, to the first phase of the programme?
Just wondering, has anybody got a schedule with them that they could sort of identify the number of engagements and the start of those engagements?
Yes, we do have a schedule of all of the engagements that have taken place, and actually we have had really good feedback from the market. So we sent out a questionnaire at the after our previous one to say that, I think it's 67% of the people who replied to our questionnaire felt that they were well informed about the NHFP after the engagement session that we'd held with them, which was 2/3 of them. Yeah, so around 70%. And the other people neither agreed nor disagreed. And I think one person strongly disagreed. But I think that, Deanne, perhaps you have a list of all of the engagements that have taken place?
You don't need to read it out, don't worry.
I think what we're looking for is also to understand, for those also listening, how that engagement is going and what substantive kind of discussions happen that enable local suppliers to understand what role they can play and how they can engage within procurement.
Yeah, so the overall strategy, I think Jessica's replied already in her answer, is to try and have as many engagements as possible in as many forums as possible. So it's been a broad strategy of having face-to-face engagements in a group setting, as well as a lot of publicity on social media to point to opportunities, a lot of publications in terms of signalling where the programme is going. So it's been a broad strategy of trying to get the local market to understand what the opportunities will look like. And trying to say to them that whilst it is important that we do engage with the main contractor and think about how that will impact on a healthcare building provision, because it's a specialist provision, there are still an awful lot of opportunities for local contractors to engage in that process. So the idea of this time, and the thing that perhaps is different from other schemes, is the strategy is to break it down into lots of different projects and then think about how those procurements work at a project level as well as at a programme level. So I think that's an important point to really understand, that whilst it seems like an amorphous programme, there are lots of opportunities at many different levels.
Do you think that's clear to those who are in the industry, especially locally, who are looking at work? Because, as you say, it seems amorphous, a large project.
Yeah, no, I think
but
it's-
if we don't see it, do you think they see it?
Well, on the response we got from the engagement survey back in June, 80% of respondents felt that the NHFP offered suitable opportunities for local businesses. So that's 80% of people who answered felt that they could identify suitable opportunities for them. That's quite a strong number, I think.
So the panel also note and has been made aware of stakeholder submissions about a designers and advisors engagement session held on the 11th of July 2024.
Yeah.
And we note mixed feedback from stakeholders about the session. From your side, could you advise what feedback you've received on the designers and advisors session?
So I understand that there's been some. Are you referring to the letters that were published on your website? So we saw some published responses to the engagement, and that it was definitely a mixed response from the letters that you received. However, that really was the only negative feedback that we received were the letters that were published on your website. Apart from that, we had either no feedback or good feedback about the opportunities as presented, and it was quite a big session. So I'm unsure about how many people actually attended, but it was a significant number. So from our perspective, we felt that it was quite a successful engagement session.
And what was the team learnt from that session that might inform or update the procurement process?
So one of the things we discuss continually is about how to ensure that the process of procurement is fair and transparent, and that what we do is offer the same opportunities to everybody. So one of the things we think about is, should we or could we hold more focused sessions, for example, by theme or by type of person? So designers or architects, would they have individual sessions? So, or should we keep it so that it's larger group sessions and then everybody hears the same message? And we continually think about that tension between focus, which helps local companies understand what their individual opportunities are, and transparency, making sure that the message is the same. So whilst it might appear that we are doing quite a lot of group sessions, we do continually think about that focus. And one of the points that we're moving forward with is the webinar sessions, where we'll be giving yet another good information session on the opportunities that stand. And then obviously we have had some projects go into delivery. So we continually think about how those tenders and those local opportunities appear on Proactus and other software.
So I do think it's important to add that actually that learning that Deanne has talked about was already demonstrated there. So instead of having one group where we had people who were more construction minded and advisors all together, we chose to separate it into two groups. Now I think, some of the queries have been around the programme, and it would be nice to have more certainty over the programme in order that those people could better plan their work, I suppose. suppose, or plan their resources in order to respond to any bids. Now, obviously, you'll understand that this is a very complex programme, that we've had, feedback in terms of procurement processes. We've taken time to review our procurement processes so that they are better.
I think
that in the
we've
end,
got
that
to where we
all
need to on that
takes time, doesn't it? But
does,
fundamentally,
but I
what I'd
think
like
we've-
to say as part of this is we can offer information, but then part of this is also the local industry being able to absorb that information. There is an ability with the information that we've provided for them to work some of these things out themselves.
Okay.
So I think
That's
that hopefully they'll be going away and doing that.
I've got, just to pick up one thing you said, was that it did sound like from your answer that you said there would also be opportunities for local contractors to be involved. Does that confirm that essentially you think the main contractor will be off Ireland?
No, I think Jessica already answered that. The prior information notice has gone out. It's been published in the UK and it's been published in Jersey. People can register interest. There are no preconceived ideas about who the main contractor would be. But it is fair to say that this is a one-off project for Jersey. It's the biggest thing that will be built for a significant period of time, perhaps ever. And it is important to realise that healthcare facilities have specialisms. It doesn't mean that there aren't local opportunities within that main acute facility, but it is important that Jersey makes the right decision in terms of the technical nature of that building, and the standards by which it has to be built are significantly tougher than any normal office block or any normal residential unit. That is fair to say.
And it's also fair to say that there's plenty of schemes. The reason that Deanna specifically said that would be available to local contractors is because there's every reason to assume that a local contractor would have the capacity and capability of delivering those, because they're the sorts of schemes that they come along and do every day of the week.
It was the main contractor, which is what I was getting at, and it was your reference to
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
there being also opportunities for Jersey companies that
There are
may
no
ask that
preconceived
question.
ideas at this point.
No. And there's every opportunity throughout.
So the local supply chain is also going to be an issue in terms of the ability to supply into the project. Has that formed, have supply chain issues formed any thinking in any part of your thinking?
Absolutely. And, I know, unfortunately, I was unwell earlier in the week, but members of the team were able to go and visit people very much talking about that, because, as you say, it's absolutely fundamental to the programme. Not only, that's what comes with that contractor thinking is also the logistics, but obviously what we're thinking about is making sure that we've done as much thinking as we possibly can to make that as easy for them and anybody as possible in building this project. As the Government of Jersey, we should be able to do that.
Have you, in terms of the procurement processes, have they been developed, tested against best practice elsewhere?
Absolutely. And, part of the, obviously we've done this three times before, or certainly twice. We've ended up with a delivery partner. I suppose planning we've done 3 times before. So there's nothing really different in the approach in that way, that there are certain procurement rules. We will continue to follow those procurement rules. But as I've said, what you can choose to do is play tunes on those procurement policies and rules, but also always remaining within them.
In terms, we've talked so far, I think, exclusively about the Overdale acute facility. Can you describe any procurement activities that might be underway in relation to either the Kensington Place ambulatory facility or the St Saviour's Health Village?
So we're currently preparing proposals in terms of those 2 other areas. They aren't publicly available as yet because, as I think we've said previously, we've got some meanwhile use on Kensington Place. We really would like to be able to offer the public better accessibility between Newgate Street and Kensington Place, for example, so that offers an opportunity to be able to do that with our temporary site there. It's a pretty small job. We've also obviously procured the buildings on Edward Place. There's work to do there, and we need to prepare some tender documentation in relation to that. We also know that there is the further development of the REBA 2 concept design for those sites that was signalled in 2023, as far back as, that we do need to progress as well, likewise the Health Village.
And
So they all need procurements.
and what is underway at the moment? Can you advise?
No, so they're in development. So we're currently preparing the documentation in order to then publish it.
But you are attempting to procure the fields relevant to the St Saviour's Health Village, is that correct?
So again, they are in private ownership, as you know. I think, again, we need to be careful about what we say in a public domain and not, because there are obviously third-party owners to those fields. But it's been clear that we have a land agent, and those fields would be important in terms of any development at the Health Village.
Can you advise when you will know when procurement activities will start? Have you got any idea of when procurement
So we have
activities will
signalled
start?
that the reason for some of our forecasts being low at the moment is because we want to be able to make commitments on those points before the end of the year, and obviously we have to have a ceiling in our budgets in order to do that.
Do you have contingencies in place around procurement if things go wrong? What is your sort of fallback plans?
Of course, we'll have to have fallback plans, but again, given the nature of procurement, I'm really not sure it would be wise to go through what those fallback plans might be at this stage. We've got every reason to believe that they would be successful.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move on a bit to to focus a little bit more on the non-Overdale parts of the project. During its public hearing with the Minister for Treasury and Resources on 4th of October, the panel heard that it is, quote, a balance of between transparency in relation to the aspects of the programme that are confidential. So for those listening in, the outline business case, which has been shared with the panel, is a confidential document. Please can you advise why the non-Overdale parts, I'm asking the Minister here particularly, please can you advise why the non-Overdale parts of the project, Kensington Place and St Saviour's Health Village, why these need to remain confidential?
Well, in the first instance, the sums of money that have been attributed to them in the overall budget, as you well know, need to remain private. And in terms of what's happening on the site, in many respects, it's not just down to them having to remain confidential, but there isn't total clarity yet as to precisely what will go on those sites. And I think we've got to avoid getting caught in the trap of being pushed into coming up with overall designs that aren't inclusive of all the things that we need. We're in the very early stages of reviewing all health facilities right across the piece, every single property and building that's involved in health, with a view to rationalising those and seeing what might be done in terms of selling older buildings and replacing some of those on various of the sites, so that we've taken a full overview. At the beginning of this, there was a sort of a fairly large rationalisation process in place, and now we're looking at it and thinking, well, there's a lot of old buildings around that are dotted around in different places, and there's a great opportunity, particularly on the Gloucester Street, Kensington Place site, to get some of that consolidated. It's going to be a big site, and it seems to make sense to make very good use of it if it's a one-off development.
You started off by saying, obviously, the figures for Kensington Place and St Saviour's Health Village that are in the outline business case have to remain confidential. I understand why that holds with a huge project like Overdale, but why does it hold with these two?
Well, because if you reveal what those figures are, and then people can very simply work out what the balance is and what's available for Overdale. So it makes sense to maintain that position for the time being. This is ongoing work. Once things are contracted, once things are underway, you can start to take a different view, particularly as the development process starts to evolve for the other two sites, once we've got total clarity on what we're doing with them.
But just testing that logic for a moment, if those figures were to become public, it would reduce the sums that were allocated to Overdale, or it would give a smaller figure than the total
In the
710.
fullness of time, yes.
It would reduce that figure. So I wonder if you could explain how you feel that that would lead to potential overbidding or increasing costs for Overdale.
No, it's all about what would be revealed about what's available for Overdale. And the whole purpose of keeping this in a single number is to avoid that situation.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not clear why that is such a, why if that figure, if you were to expand the amounts, then people might think, oh, there's more money and we can bid more. But if we're shrinking the amount that's visible to contractors, why would that lead them to bid for even more?
We're not making any indication at all as to contractors to what's available, and that comes back to the very purpose of keeping those numbers bundled into a single figure.
But we have
So that when we
710
go out to
million.
contract, people have to put their best price forward, and they haven't got any indication of how much money we've got to spend.
Well, they have 710 million.
They know that we've got 710 million to build an acute facility and make a meaningful start on the two other sites. That's all they know.
And they
The rest
also
is guesswork.
they also know it's a total price, which it's very, very, very unusual to have in a public domain. So if we were in the UK, obviously there'd be elements of all of our budgets that people would not have clarity and transparency over, because you've got the Treasury function who have all sorts of pots of money. We don't have that. We have the Public Finance Manual. It's very transparent. I understand all of the reasons for that, and we understand the constraints of what we're working within. But it's unprecedented, I believe, to have a number that includes everything in the public domain. And I think that it's far better to keep that competitive tension if the less information we provide that. And as the Minister says, what that then means is that we get the best possible prices in all things. Now, procurement's not just about price. It's about many, many other things too. And it's obviously about the behaviour of any contractor that we'd like to work with as well.
I'll move on. Can you advise what information you can share about potential plans for Kensington Place? It's described as meaningful progress in the documentation, official documentation. Where are you at the moment with what's going to happen at Kensington Place?
Well, we have to accommodate all of the existing outpatient functions that take place. Virtually anything that's not moving to Overdale has to remain on site. There's no plans for that to be dispersed to anywhere else. But I think the opportunity for us is what else we can add into that situation, which may be helpful.
And have you got any ideas about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that are floating around at the moment. The possibility of having some facilities for consolidating charitable activity, where there are shared facilities where instead of having lots of small charities renting buildings and finding themselves in financial difficulty, they could be facilitated in a sort of suite of buildings that would allow them to share facilities and so on to reduce their operating costs, which I think would be quite useful. We're also doing work with public health about developing a new strategy for illness prevention, and there may well be that there's a centre for that activity on the site as well.
In terms of the new healthcare facilities, all of the activities that form part of the ambulatory site were provided in the feasibility study with the schedule of accommodation that went with it. And as the Minister says, it's the re-provision of those services on that site.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is there is an allocated sum in the outline business case for Kensington Place. What is that money going to be spent on? That's what I'm trying to get
So
to.
in the outline business case, it sets out an option. Obviously, there's some budgetary information available on that. But we've also said previously in the, I accept the private briefings, that in essence what we'd really like to do is continue on with our work in order to determine the best possible use. Given that things have moved on a bit, it's right to review the brief that was set out in the feasibility studies and check again what the best use of that money that's set aside would be on that site. But the overall aim is no different from the strategic outline case and the strategic outline information update that was published in June and November of last year, setting out the three-site solution with the ambulatory, the acute and the health village, still using the Enid Kenno Health and Wellbeing Centre.
Yes.
I think some of the clarity that we're seeking is it's very difficult to explain to the public where services are actually going to end up. So at what point are you going to be able to give some clarity about that? And also the time frame for how you're going to deliver that total solution? Because it seems as though it's a bit of a moving feast at the moment.
So certainly in terms of the overall scope of across the 4 facilities, that has been set out, I think, since Christmas or June of last year, so Christmas, the previous Christmas. So all of the services that were going to be collected together in each of those different locations has been set out for a long time. If we have been poor in communicating that long-term ambition, then we can certainly, I know that there's confusion around the word acute, and sometimes that's a bit mysterious to people. So we can definitely do more work on that.
Jessica, but we've just heard this morning that, and it may well be this is the plan, to actually move various facilities that are providing currently health services across the island. What we're trying to understand is where in your planning and where in your design have we got a shape and a configuration of services that will actually fit within that 110 million overall budget?
I think in terms of public visibility, I like to think we've been reasonably clear. We've made it plain that the Enid Kenno Centre, instead of being demolished in 4 years' time, is going to be there for the longer term. It may well be that 1 or 2 of the services change, as proves to be convenient or otherwise to the public. All of the acute services are moving to Overdale, and the non-acute or ambulatory services are staying in town. I think as an overview, that's pretty clear, and I think we try and explain that in terms of inpatient and outpatient care in the main. So as far as the public is concerned, if they're going for an operation, there's an overnight stay, that's at Overdale. If they're going for daycare, that's in town.
We understand that the overall thing, I think it's about the fact there is money allocated for something specific, but it isn't clear what that thing is.
I think I can explain that by saying that you go through a planning process, you go through an evaluation process, and all of that needs funding. And this money is sitting there to fund all of those initial, all the same processes that we went through to get to the point where we are now requires funding. We have to go through those 2 processes again for the 2 other sites, and the money that we've got there is to see us through that process.
May I just quickly ask, one element of moving to a phased approach, and this is phase 1 and phase 1 financing, was about risk and about changing economic circumstances. Are you still happy, Minister, that if we reach the end of phase 1 and a decision has to be made that that is the only phase to proceed, that we will have from what is planned for the 3 sites, and obviously, as you say, the continuance of the Enid Kenno facility in St Ewold's, we will have a fully functioning healthcare estate after phase 1?
Well, a lot depends on world circumstances. If things kick off in the Middle East and things become terrible and oil prices soar, we may find ourselves in a difficult position. But we will find ourselves with a brand new acute hospital and all of the current facilities that you could run a part acute hospital and all the ambulatory facilities. I think we'd have to be pretty severe if we don't make any progress anywhere, to be honest with you, because we've got demographic problems in terms of the ageing population. We've got an increase in dementia. We've got a need for specialist dementia care. So I think some of those things have to be taken into consideration. And unless things are pretty desperate, we would have to make some moves in some directions. But everything will depend on where we are. I mean, we've gone from being in a very stable global situation to being in a pretty unfortunate and pretty unstable situation. So we've got to adapt to that, as everybody else is throughout the world. But we've got to proceed as if we're going to be stable and balanced going forward. And then we have to adapt and adjust if circumstances change.
Coming at it from a different angle then, will we, when we commit to meaningful progress, will that mean that at the end of that 4 years' time in the budget, we've passed the point of no return on either Kensington Place or St Saviour's, that those projects will have to go ahead because so much has already been spent on them?
No, I think this is a progressive arrangement. Over the 4 years, we'll see things evolve. We'll be looking at world circumstances. We're looking at the state of our own economy, and the stopping or starting of any of that will depend on the circumstances that relate at the time. We can only predict so much. We're all human, so we can only act in good faith for as long as we're able to do so.
But we could be spending millions of pounds on facilities. The public won't know what they are because it's confidential. what that money is being
Well,
spent on, and yet
the public won't know what they are. I mean, we're quite happy to be open about every stage of the development process. So in the same way as the plans have been available throughout, and I think there's been total transparency throughout this whole process, other than the things that really relate to commercial confidentiality. So the public will see those plans as they progress on both sides.
let me refine the question. The States Assembly is going to be asked to approve allocation, a global allocation, which includes a certain amount, which is private, for each of those facilities, without knowing what they are, and without knowing whether they commit to a definite expenditure beyond that point or not.
Sorry,
I'm happy. I don't want to keep talking, but
No, Minister, I want to hear, it's a political point, it's a political point.
As I say, I can go through the same thing again. We are where we are. We're going through a process. We'll be completely open and transparent about that process. And as things evolve, we can make more information available. And once we're underway and once we're contracted and so on, all the dynamics change as we move. It's a moving process. What we're doing is looking at effectively refreshing all of our health facilities over a period of time. And I think, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but are we not obliged to make best use of public money? Would we not be deemed to be irresponsible if we went around waving a flag saying, come and spend all this money for us? I put the question, I know it's not for me to question you, but it's a question we all have to ask ourselves, and it's a question the Assembly has to ask itself. Does it want to have total transparency at the cost of putting taxpayers' money out unnecessarily? I would defend our position wholeheartedly.
I think there's a question about whether there is an overcautious attitude on your side. I still don't feel I've heard satisfactory reason why a slight narrowing in the 710 million envelope would cause a problem for value for money.
Well, then we have to probably agree to disagree. I'm afraid.
We will.
Yeah.
Could I very quickly on that transparency, Minister? You mentioned that you have been transparent about what's going where in the programme.
Yep.
And the panel the public have the feasibility study that details the preferred option with acute at Overdale, ambulatory at Kensington Place, and has a lot of detail around the size and quantum of each facility. But that was issued in June 2023. So is it for us to understand that the substantive expectations of what is in the feasibility study with regards to Kensington Place and St Saviour's hasn't changed to date since no publication has been made?
The substantive intentions are the same. All that we're saying is there's an opportunity here that we shouldn't waste for looking at other smaller elements and saying, is this a good opportunity whilst we're planning it, whilst we're investing, to rationalise some of the other parts of the estate? And you're quite correct in saying that in comparison to the main project, they're relatively minor, but I think it's quite important to take the opportunity to rationalise where we can.
But would you accept that the Assembly would want to know the detail behind that?
Well,
To support the decision making?
I'm very happy for the Assembly to have access to every part of the process as we go forward, but we can't give the Assembly information that hasn't yet been defined, because you've got to assess things, you've got to look at them and say, is that worth moving? What would be the consequences of that? How much would you realise for that? What benefit is there in moving some of these smaller elements into Kensington Place? But I think we're very happy to be completely open and transparent about the whole process, as I genuinely believe we have been over the course of the last 2 years.
But may it be the case then that if Assembly members don't have that content, that they don't feel ready to actually consider the OBC in the round? Is there a consideration to be given as to whether or not we need more time for the OBC to have more data, more information, more detail around what needs to be done?
I don't believe that's necessary at all. I believe there is a real risk in things being held up for the sake of things that, in my view, are relatively minor. I consider it my job to have to sell that to the Assembly, and there's 49 members. If people look at it and say that's not for us, then I can't control the political process, but I can certainly do my best to guide it. And I have to say, I think you all know, been very comfortable about the approach that's been taken, about the competence of the team of people that are doing the job.
Can I ask particularly about St Saviour's? To what extent are you looking at value for money in the development of that facility?
I like to think that the answer to that would be the same as the answer to everything else. I think we're looking for value for money everywhere. That would be a blanket statement about the whole process.
But in terms of, you've made reference during this hearing to a very large health estate at Gloucester Street and Kensington Place, would it not make more sense in value for money to at least examine the possibility that those facilities might be better located on the existing health estate rather than buying yet more fields to?
Well, if you look at the relative, I'm just talking in general terms here, the relative price of purchasing land as a percentage of the overall cost of this entire scheme, it's, I have to say, negligible, entirely negligible. And really, this is about putting the right stuff in the right place. And I think all the work that's been done to date pretty much indicates that where we're looking to put things is the places that people want them to be.
But have you considered that it might be better value for money? Has it specifically been explored about whether a better value for money option might be to look at Kensington
We've gone through an
Place?
evaluation process that says that those various elements should be where they are. And the cost of developing in open land in the countryside is a lot cheaper than developing in town. So if the initial decision process indicates that that's where it should be, there would be, in my view, a commercial benefit in freeing up land in the middle of town, because obviously as development, land is worth more than development in the countryside. But I think the first thing to do is to make sure that you've evaluated where the people that work in the health industry and the people that are treated in health want to have their facilities. And I think we should base our decisions essentially on that in the first instance.
But value for money is surely a factor that would come into it. So if there's a tension between value for money on the one hand and an assessment that says that people would like to be in the countryside on the other, which side are you going to come down on?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that all the indications are that people want those facilities in the countryside, and the truth of the matter is that there's a cost benefit as well. So there's not a tension, there's not a dilemma, because the two things actually fit together very nicely. We're very fortunate the decision for those things to go there means that it's actually probably going to be a cheaper build cost, and if anything, it'll free up valuable land in the centre of town, if indeed it frees up any at all. But I can't make that as
I think what you're suggesting is, in essence, that there's many different factors. Of course, we have to deliver value for money, but the whole purpose of something like an outline business case, and indeed the strategic outline case before that, where it explored a number of different options against a number of different criteria, and then determined what the best kind of configuration of service was. That work was done there, and it was then, with the evidence that the Minister's talking about, as well as the information from our client, who is Health and Community Services, that their preference was for the health village at St Saviour's.
I understand that. I know the history. I think what I'm trying to get at is, what if somebody were to come along and say, there's less money than you thought, and therefore, shouldn't you look at putting it somewhere cheaper? What I'm hearing from you is you don't think it is cheaper to put those services in town.
I certainly don't. I think we're in the fortunate position. The decision that's been made actually runs in our favour from a commercial point of view, rather than the other way around. If you're asking the question sort of back to front, then there would be a dilemma, because you're saying, well, the option we've chosen is the more expensive one, but it isn't. So we're just in a fortunate position that there is no tension, as I see it.
So the question that arises at the end of this line of questioning is, would you be prepared to create separate heads of expenditure for the non-Overdale projects at any point?
I think that, I think we'd have to, would we not? At some point, eventually, you have to develop separate heads of expenditure, but by that stage, you're far enough along in the process for it not to matter.
So at what point would you?
That strikes me as common sense.
So I think, Minister, we did have that conversation with Treasury perhaps a year ago or so, and we talked about whether it was we did need to do that or not. I believe you questioned the Treasury Minister on this last week or the week before. I think that she identified the fact that if you created separate heads of expenditure, then of course that the thing that we're seeking, which is to have flexibility, but of course the downside of that is the fact that it's not entirely transparent. There is lots of transparency, however, in all of the auditing, in all of the financial reporting, in all of the escalation that goes on within the programme. So in the end, I think we had several conversations about whether it should or shouldn't be done. But in the end, right now, today, the reason it's one head of expenditure is to be able to retain that commercial tension. And I think the Treasury Minister or the Treasurer identified other areas where it was done in a similar way, such as the infrastructure rolling vote, for example, example, or other property, because for exactly the same reasons that you don't necessarily want contractors knowing exactly how much you've allocated to something, which may or may not be construction cost, because that's what we have here, is lots of different types of cost.
There's a difference between creating a head of expenditure and making it public.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing the calculations, you have to know exactly where you stand, but how much you choose to make public and the way in which you choose to make it public is a different discussion. That's the very discussion
The
that we're having
logic
here.
would be that once the bidding process is underway, the figures become, the commercial tension argument disappears, in that the people have made their
The next
bids.
round of commercial tension continues throughout the course of the next two sites. So you have to, if you adopt that principle, you have to maintain that principle all the way through.
But this would be unprecedented. I mean, every other capital project in the government programme has a figure next to it. The SCAE Youth Centre, Montalebe School, they all have a figure next to them. Are you saying that health should never have figures put against them?
I think eventually everything will come into can come into the public domain, but not in my view, it shouldn't come into the public domain until such time as it doesn't prejudice the chance of getting the best value for money.
And
As-
it
as an
isn't
overall statement.
unprecedented because if you think about the infrastructure rolling vote, which has many projects below it, in the capital table within the budget, it's a single line. And I think there's some schools projects where they amalgamate the types of it.
Respectfully, there are examples where budgets require capital allocation, infrastructure
Yeah.
rolling vote is one.
Yeah.
But the Assembly doesn't, to my knowledge, approve a budget of, for example, the consolidated amount for schools and youth centres and say schools and youth centres. So do you see where there could be a tension that,
I see
for the most part, many of us are, as states members, looking to understand where an allocation is and then be able to evaluate for what the Public Finances Law defines as a major project.
This is a major project. Yeah.
And do you think that if you separated each element out, each of those would constitute a major project should they have their own head of expenditure?
So I think we've already spoken about the head of expenditure, and I think there's been a general agreement at this point that it will be a single head of expenditure. So just to answer that point, and then it isn't unprecedented because that you do have rolled up heads of expenditure. So that's the second point. And then in terms of transparency, the capital table sets out lots of different capital projects, and there is narrative detail around those that enable members of the Assembly and the public to understand what's going to be spent.
I think, in terms of the capital programme, we do have, for instance, in the SIPES area, we have a grouped head of expenditure in SIPES, we have a grouped head of expenditure for infrastructure, rolling votes. So there are other groups head of expenditure. I think the problem the current capital programme does have is exactly the issue we're highlighting here. If you're too specific in your published documentation, it does signal to the market how much money you have for any project, whether it be a £1 million project or a multi-million pound project. So there is a wider conversation about how we publish the capital programme and what we put in it. That's probably for another day. It's not part of this hearing, but you're right in highlighting we've got two approaches in the capital programme. We do have groups heads, but we also have specific project lines. I think in publishing specific project lines, it does give us a commercial problem when we go out to tender because people can read the government plan and know how much money we've got for each project, which is the point we're raising here.
And I think you've got to look to the UK in this. So it would be very interesting to know for one of their major projects, if you were able to identify to the level that you're looking for us to provide against those major projects that are being undertaken in the UK, actually what each of those pots of money are. And I think that they've probably got enough projects so that there isn't the transparency that we get here. Now, I get the transparency, but I guess it's that compromise. And if in the end that transparency is leading to a lack of value for money, you asked us about lessons learned previously. We believe this is a lesson, that we shouldn't publish that information. Unfortunately, the commercial tension doesn't end at the point of award of contract. It continues. And I suppose we have to think about the wider procurement as well. Why do contracting companies go go bust? Why aren't contracting companies making any money? There's lots of different factors to this kind of discussion, and it's in taking in account of all of those that we then have to think about, well, have we been doing this well in the past? And I guess what we're trying to do is learn lessons and say, perhaps we're not. Perhaps it's really hard to deliver in that circumstance, so we might create a better environment for our project.
I did ask a question that I don't think I quite got to the answer of, that if they were separate heads of expenditure for each project, and we currently know of roughly 3, would you foresee those within a budget being identified as major projects?
So
Each one in their own right, if they were to have had their own project line, would they be treated as major projects?
So we know the rules around what a major project is, which is a major project is something defined as in excess of £5 million. Those are the rules. And I think if I discuss that more fully, then I'm alluding to figures that are in the OBC that we have not disclosed.
Okay.
Do you want to keep going?
Okay, we'll move on. Of course, the panel is keen to ensure confidentiality of the OBC, but what is public is the supporting information for the budget 2025 to 2028.
Yes.
And in that, page 6 details some of the financial benefits contained within the OBC and make those public, including capital receipts of up to circa £10 million could be achieved through the reprovision or redevelopment of buildings that could become vacant.
Yep.
So please could you provide some more information about how this figure has been calculated?
Yeah.
Would you?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it. So when we were putting together the OBC and we were thinking about the release of land and the release of buildings, we did an exercise that looked across the estate and tried to think about a figure that might represent some of the capital receipts that we may or may not receive. So it was a figure that was a very low estimate based on the release of certain aspects of the health estate. It doesn't represent a definite list of properties. It basically was an up to figure and trying to signal that we would receive some amounts, and we as the wider government, not the programme, just to be clear, in terms of capital receipts. So it was a general and broad exercise, not a definitive list of specific assets.
Were assets, in reaching that, there were assets considered more likely or less likely? It sounds like that they might have been. You said there were some things identified.
There wasn't an exercise that said more likely or less likely. It was really just an estimate based on looking across the overall value of the health estate in general.
Okay. Did this kind of assessment, given this forms part of the OBC, but is public, does this form follow any best practice for assessing financial release of capital assets?
So by best practice, you mean in terms of valuation methods and looking at, no, it really was a very general estimate based on the overall health estate. It was trying to give an indicator of the amount of capital receipts that may or may not arise. It could be a much bigger number depending on the outcome of the future phases of the project.
And it could look differently, couldn't it? So, for
differently.
example, instead of releasing those assets, you might choose to rent, for example. I mean, I don't think it's these assets that form part of that, but there are alternatives in terms of renting. And I think that none of this has been netted off against the request. So in that respect, that's why we haven't followed any kind of comprehensive valuation procedure for them. It's just trying to identify that there are benefits and that some of those are financial benefits, and we'd like to expand on that list, I believe, in recognising that there will be property that will become free. Again, I think it's learning from the Our Hospital project, where actually the whole of the Kensington Place site, for example, was going to become free, and actually there was no recognition that there might be a financial benefit to that. Of course, there might not be, because it's full of healthcare buildings at the moment. So we're just trying to say, look, there might be some financial benefits. We haven't cashed them, though.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, that figure it's not based on an evidence methodology, and it could be, as you say, far higher.
There is no evidence methodology that's
Yeah.
available at this point in time.
So
It's
you
a
haven't
best-
looked at, yeah,
It's a best guess scenario given the.
but it sounds quite conservative. It could be higher in theory.
Could well be, and
And
there's
I
still
think
some fine tuning, so.
In terms of valuation of assets that are being realised, you don't actually crystallise the value until you exactly know what you're going to be using that asset for. If, for instance, if you're going to do a full redevelopment for a certain use, you'll get a gross development value. You take off your cost, you get a value in a simple equation. If it's a reuse of an existing building and a refurb, that will give you a different value. It really does depend on the end use. And then your residual valuation will follow. So until you do that on a site-specific basis, you don't really know the number.
And market values at the
And
time.
market
because
values
you-
at the
you could
time
see
and
a
market
distinct
costs at the
change
time.
in property values out here that could
Absolutely,
have a profound effect on that.
Can I just speak to this? Folks, your greatest asset appears to be Gloucester Street Hospital. Is it your intention eventually to use all elements of Gloucester Street Hospital, or might you consider selling off chunks of that to underpin the financial spend that you are anticipating for the three projects? Because it seems to me those are very viable pieces of estate.
I think we've got to go through a process, as the Minister's outlined, in assessing what services remain and what opportunities are on Gloucester Street to either attract new services and free up value elsewhere, or to not do that and free up value at Gloucester Street. I think there's a bit of a jigsaw process to go through on the Gloucester Street site. Certainly, from a practical perspective, if you free up big chunks of real estate in town, as the Minister said, that will have a higher value than a greenfield site somewhere else potentially. I guess the question around value realisation and spend, the expenditure will come before the value realisation. So we are going to need to expend money on the acute hospital before we realise any value on other sites.
Okay, we'll move off capital receipts to agency staff costs, and one financial benefit is up to £2.2 million a year in reduction in agency staff costs. Please could you advise whether this figure has been informed by a workforce plan or what methodology was used?
So the methodology used was we looked at the financial cost up to the end of 2023. This is the basis of quite a lot of the modelling. So taking the ledger from the existing healthcare expenditure for up to 2023, and then we did an exercise that looked across that ledger and took a percentage of that as a saving on the basis of the expenditure that occurs within that ledger. Sorry, I look like I've confused you. So we took
Yes,
we took a view of actual expenditure, and then we thought
Agency expenditure.
agency expenditure. We took the whole of the health ledger and then looked at
Expenditure over a year.
expenditure over a year. Then we looked at aspects of that within the ledger, took a percentage, and came up with that as a saving.
And how does that link to the provision of the facility, the acute facility at Overdale? Is it specific to a change in how the facilities run, or is this just about the health service in general?
So it's a mixture in general, and again, you know, it is a moving feast. We're 4 years away from actually provisioning it, but the thinking behind it was that if we provide a better facility, if we provide a nicer place for employees to work, then theoretically one of the benefits is that we get a greater degree of retention of staff. On that basis, theoretically, then you would need much less agency staff to fill those vacancies. And therefore, that is the upward effect of having a better and more modern healthcare facility.
So that does sound like a bit of a guess in terms of when you came up with a percentage. You said you came up with a percentage of the total spend.
Yeah.
What informed that percentage?
It was an estimate based on discussions within the team. Again, you know, we're far out from thinking about how the workforce will work within the new facilities. You can say guess, but you can also say estimate. You could say conservative estimate. It's just a view at this point in time. None of these figures can be definite. We could have made it much bigger or much smaller. We've come to I think what is a reasonable view of that. Modelling is modelling, isn't it? It's a theoretical exercise. We're trying to put a value on benefits realisation. In the grand scheme of healthcare spending overall, that's quite a small benefit. And we haven't put those within our cost expenditures. We're basically just trying to marker and signal what may or may not be a benefit. And we'll see over time whether they become realised or not.
I think the reason we're asking
Yeah.
these questions is because the OBC, in its full fat
Yeah.
version, is there to both critically evaluate the path you
course.
are on and understand
Yes.
whether it's correct and to
Yeah.
what extent the methodologies in there are rock solid or speculation or, as you say, and to what extent within it, it may or may not flag the methodologies used. Okay, we'll move on.
No,
I think
it's a completely fair question, but I think I must just be very clear that all of the estimates we've put in the OBC are conservative in the benefits realisation. They are estimates at this stage, and they're perfectly normal within an OBC as it's developed at this time. So that is an important point of clarification.
No, that's helpful. Well, I'll ask about one more estimate, if that's possible,
Okay,
which is
that's
gross
fine.
value add and social value.
Yeah.
And the supporting information made public highlights up to £59.2 million could be released through construction jobs, apprenticeships and student opportunities.
Yes.
What will be the 5,000 student opportunities identified?
So we run, the whole point of the programme is that it's partly a legacy for the island, but one of the major benefits is that it helps in the economy. And part of that is trying to think about the best ways to help the economy and help young people or help certain sections of the population that perhaps don't have the opportunities of others. So in terms of the in terms of the opportunities for students, the idea is that we will have a rolling programme over the 4-year period of construction that looks at various ways that we can interact with the population, and one of those would be thinking about opportunities for young people and how those workshops and other opportunities can be realised. So an example of this is during this half term, we've got one of our first ones, which is we're working with Skills for Jersey in terms of a skills camp for years 7 to 8, and I think it's 9 to 10, over 2 sets of 2-day periods. We've got volunteering opportunities, not just for the team in GOJ, but with the wider advisory team. So there are a team of circa 20 volunteers doing that, and that's available to all children in Jersey. That's just an example of the first one. So it'll be those sorts of opportunities. So it'll be working with construction partners, advisors, and the GOJ team. So that's how those opportunities will be created.
And it's enshrined through our social value that comes through our procurements, and obviously something that we ourselves sign up to as a Government of Jersey team. It's fair to say that the Design, Engineer, Construct course, I think again, was something that emerged out of previous
brilliant.
hospital projects, for example, but
Diane
wasn't
was really
necessarily
helpful and
declared.
clear on that, but I think we have to move on.
So yeah, that's social value. The
Yeah.
450 job opportunities that are mentioned
Yeah.
is presumably gross value added rather than social value. And
Well, yeah, we did a calculation on gross value add and tried to come up with a number based on a solid methodology, which is an estimate.
But just to be clear, that 450 construction jobs, is that those are sort of one-off jobs?
It could be a mixture of new or retained within the industry, depending on how we spent a long time thinking about whether it's new or retained, because it's difficult to know depending on how the commercial approach works. But in our view, there would be those opportunities associated with the programme.
So you're expecting about 450 local jobs?
Yes, either new or retained, within the industry,
And sorry, if it's an outside contractor, how many people do you think the outside contractor will bring in? Or will you be relying on them to hire local people?
So I think we've said that at this stage the procurement's completely open and that no decisions have been made yet in respect to any contracting partner.
Yeah, it's just the concern, obviously, that if we can get 450 jobs locally, that would be wonderful. But I know in the previous scheme, the majority of jobs were expected to come from the construction industry was supposed to be bringing their own employees over, and there was even a suggestion that we might build temporary homes to accommodate them. So you're not foreseeing any of those problems arising.
So I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because what we're talking about is a procurement process, and at the moment, historically, that procurement process happened very, very early on. And so obviously that contractor was on board and they were able to predict how they were going to do it. At this stage, we don't know how those different parties are thinking about delivering the work. But what we are saying, and we are saying here, is that we think that there'll be at least 450 jobs that are generated as a consequence of the works that we're doing. We think that that's a really good number, and we think it's a really conservative number.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move on then.
Okay.
Move on to smart objectives.
Okay, so we know that one of the key things of the outline business case is the delivery of the objectives that are outlined. Just as a starter, can you just tell us when they were last updated?
I think they were from the strategic outline case. We had a review in the OBC, but it's fair to say that I don't think we amended them from the strategic outline case.
Are you intending to?
So objectives are a continual and evolving thing, aren't they? So we spend a lot of time thinking about how to measure ourselves appropriately, not just with the published document of objectives, but generally in terms of what are we as a programme team trying to achieve. And that's a mixture of financial reporting and then time reporting, isn't it? So everyone's objective is to deliver the programme on time and on budget. So our objectives at the highest level are to achieve those two things, and with the sole intention of delivering the programme that gives fit-for-purpose healthcare facilities for generations, in fact, isn't it? So we hold that responsibility very seriously. So whilst the objectives, in an outline business case look like they look, it's a much more nuanced view internally. So we take a great deal of time and effort in our internal reporting through things like our monthly highlight report, where we have a lot of aspects of our own performance on almost like a matrix view that try and pinpoint the areas where we have to make sure that we're delivering our highest level of strategic objectives and those that sit below.
Thank you. So clearly one of the things that the public will want to do is track this.
Yes.
Because this is actually the content that gives them the indication that things are actually happening and are on plan. Just in terms of, for the benefit of the public, if I could just say that these contain 4 or 5 dimensions, one being specific, which is to outline in a clear statement what precisely is required. Measurable, which is to include a measure to enable the organisation to monitor progress and know when it's been achieved. Achievable, which is to ensure that failure is not built in to what it is you're trying to do. Realistic, and you've mentioned them being delivered on achievement as to whether or not they're focused on outcomes and not just processes. And the issue around time-bound and the timeliness by which those objectives must be achieved. And I apologise for teaching you to suck eggs on that, but I think it's important.
It's a very good reminder for everyone.
To know. So you just mentioned that they haven't been updated since the strategic outline case. We've been looking at the objectives within the strategic outline case, and they don't really clearly define the terms expressed in the objectives. And we're trying to establish how you're going to improve on that and how you're going to be able to communicate to the public what your intentions are moving from the strategic outline case to the outline business case. Could you just help us with that?
So I think the question is about whether the public and other interested stakeholders can understand how the programme is progressing, and then whether we've met the objectives of the programme. So you can define the objectives in many ways, can't you? So we've been given an envelope of 710 million, and the OBC sets out what we've got to deliver from that. So if we set that as the basis of the objectives, and that's what the public are interested in, then we've got to say to ourselves, how do we communicate that? So we communicate that in many ways. We will be communicating that in many ways in terms of the financial reporting, which will come through various Treasury reports. It'll come out of the annual report and accounts that Treasury publish, and we ourselves will have to ensure that regularly we are communicating how we're getting on in both in terms of time and money. And as Government of Jersey employees, we have to operate within the Public Finances Manual and the Public Finances Law. So our objectives in the regard to our own behaviours and our views of how we are progressing are set very firmly for us, aren't they? So in all those aspects, that's how we will ensure that the public are aware of what we're doing.
Okay, so one of the things that we know that the measurable element of the objectives, so there's not much data that is contained either within the strategic outline case or the outline business case that gives the public information as to what it is you're trying to do through the offer you're trying to make through this project.
Well, I think the measurable bit is the thing that I've said. The measurable bit is delivering the healthcare facilities on time and within budget, isn't it? Those are at the highest level of that.
Yeah, so I guess the SMART objectives set out overall, what are we seeking to achieve through this programme of works? And then in the OBC, we do have the benefits section, which then looks at each of the objectives and sets out how, in numbers and how specifically, as required by a SMART objective, will it achieve each of those things. So in the benefits section of the OBC, which is later on in 5.8, it sets out how that's been done, both at the strategic outline case update information stage and the outline business case. Now, a lot of those objectives are all around, because of course, whilst budget and programme are really, really important things, I suppose if you judged some projects by those, like, I suppose I shouldn't name specifics, but there are large projects, not in Jersey, that at the time may not have met those two objectives, but actually have met all of the other benefits of those projects, for example, collecting 2 parts of a town or hosting enormous concerts, that it's all of those sorts of benefits that we'll be measuring and that we were seeking to set out in the objectives, because whilst we know we're going to be judged on budget and programme, and they're very, very important things, I guess the whole purpose of the outline business case is to being able to say, but overall, viewed from all the different ways, what are the benefits? And they are about actually having staff in a hospital because it's the best possible place to be. Things like infection control, things like have we got privacy and dignity for our patients. And we've tried to capture those through the benefits and how we will seek to measure them. So whilst the objectives set out our target, I guess the benefits are the response to that. And some of those, we'll only be able to measure once we've actually open the facilities, but there's others, like Deanne has said, that we do anticipate through financial reporting, through programme reporting, through states members updates, through all of the various mechanisms that we have, that we will be reporting on and will be available publicly.
Okay, can you just then explain, having given some examples, why we're not actually making this public so that people can understand how and in what way the project is progressing?
So I guess for me, I'd have to look back at the strategic outline case summary, because I think maybe that the outline business case summary we have, but I think that the benefits were set out in the information update, because you've just provided some of those. So I guess they're in response to the objectives. And I guess from a public perspective, I think the objectives were set out in the strategic outline case summary that we issued last year, but we can double check on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're looking for is how are you actually focused on, the specificity of what it is you're trying to actually achieve. Because when you look at this, there's quite a lot of generalised statements, and in order for us to track and monitor and test your processes as to whether you're on track to deliver these benefits or these outcomes, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of information around that. Can you?
So further on, so I think if we look at the benefits, that hopefully you'll see some of the more detailed information on that, of how we were going to seek to measure ourselves against those objectives that were set out.
Yeah. So in terms of the performance of those objectives, can you just help the public to understand as to what processes, what arrangements are in place? If you've not updated the objectives, if you've not revisited them in the context of the strategic outline case, can you just tell us what process you've got in place to be able to track completion against some of these objectives?
Well, I was just saying, some of those things you don't revisit because they remain pretty static throughout the process. The changeable ones are the as I see it, and as I say, I'm not a specialist in this area, but the changeable elements are the financial ones and the timing. They're the things that have to be constantly revised. And I think the overall objectives and the benefits, once they're set out, remain pretty static. And that might just be me being ignorant of what smart assessment is, but I think that there are different elements, and some of those elements remain more static than others.
Yeah, I think it's, we did a review of them. They remain relevant. So if I think the view you're espousing is they're quite general. It's whether they would be, there's a requirement in an OBC for them to be more specific. Just because they're in the OBC in sort of a general way doesn't mean that we ourselves aren't measuring them in a very clear way.
I think what we're doing is we're working with your process.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
We're just trying to test
Yes,
how do you
quite.
work yourselves with
Yes. So we spend a lot of time, as I said, thinking about our own objectives internally.
If there were shortfalls or inadequacies and you can spot them, we'd be very happy to.
I think if we need to express how we're measuring ourselves differently in public terms, some of that measurement is going to be ongoing.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a lot of, I guess, program measurement at the moment in terms of getting us to where we, at the start of a construction project, we're going to have a lot of deliverables around that project itself and a lot of measurements at that point in terms of are things being done on time, to cost, to plan, to quality. Once we've then got built facilities, we're then going to be in a realisation of benefits phase of did everything we say in the ABC actually become true? Do we think our use of consultants and temporary staff, has that actually dropped in line with what we expected, et cetera, et cetera? So I think maybe we can work with the panel in terms of that sort of questioning. If we need to express that differently, that might help all parties,
I think it helps with the transparency as to where the focus is and the specific interventions are. Yeah.
The bottom line here is that we should be able to have some measure of whether there's been success or failure.
Yeah.
And when we look at these smart objectives, it's very hard to see under measurable how we would measure whether this has been a success or not. Objective 2, to deliver new hospital facilities that provide best whole life value. And the measurable thing is delivering best value compared to other options. I mean, it's very difficult for us to look at that and say, okay, that's a tick or a cross, because it doesn't actually say what is going to be measured.
So that's because if you go to the objectives of the challenge, the response is provided in the benefits. So I guess what the objectives section perhaps needs to say is, in order to see how we're going to measure ourselves against these objectives, you need to go to the benefits section. And in the benefits section, it does give more specific responses. It also says which were updated at outline business case. So it does provide more specificity, which you can say and I can't, in terms of each of those items. So, for example, it does give, since we've covered the recruitment one, things like reduction in agency staff costs of 10%, circa 2.2 million. So it does provide that in that space. So that is providing those actual measures. I think what we have here are our overarching objectives. And really, I suppose what the OBC is saying is that they haven't changed that much. We know we need healthcare facilities. We know they've got to represent value for money. So those things, yes, you do review them, but they don't change. We're still on the same mission to deliver those things.
I guess the question that's in my mind here is, these objectives have been described as general. They are in the strategic outline case on page 10.
Yeah.
But the methodology that we've seen in the Green Book sets out to use is one of SMART, which makes an objective can be both general but requires adherence to how, as Deputy Wilson said, it should be specific, measurable and achievable. So do you feel you have covered off, is there a tension here that actually you see the objectives are following a smart methodology of evaluation, or are they following a different methodology? And if it's remarkably different, what is it?
So I think that there's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, because I guess in the essence what the SMART objectives do is they are set out in that way, they're specific, measurable, etc. And where we've said how we're going to measure them is in what we're calling the benefit section instead of in an objective section, but it's still doing the same thing. It's still saying this is what we'd like to achieve and this is how we're going to measure doing that. That's in the benefit section, but it's still an objective, it's still a SMART objective, and we're still saying how we're going to meet it. So I think it's in the vocabulary rather than a fundamental thing that we have not done that has not met the Green Book. And I don't know that we have got our colleagues from EY here if you'd like further information on whether what we have provided here is appropriate for an outline business case and the interpretation of that vocabulary.
I think if there are inadequacies in the way the process has been managed, it would be helpful to have clarity on what you see those inadequacies as being, because I think on this side of the table we're having trouble to identify what they are.
I think whenever we hear things like, we understand that the whole objective of this thing is to deliver affordable and good healthcare facilities, it makes us, that could have applied to any of the projects. It would not have been any different. And so what we're trying to drill down into is what is specific in this project and how are you going to measure it, rather than accepting there's just an overall
that
requirement
makes a lot of sense.
to do things. So, that's what we're driving at. But I think we can move on. Deputy Wilson, do you have any more on that section?
There is just one other thing, if I could, in terms of the tracking and the monitoring. I think if I could just clarify from what Mr. Skate has just said, is that there is a different approach that you're taking to the programme management, day-to-day operational stuff. So there will be a lot more detail, I presume, in terms of what specific tasks and deliverables you're actually achieving on a day-to-day basis, which is different to what is contained in the OBC.
Yeah, so there'll be some high-level programme. The OBC is very much a high-level document. When we're getting into a more detailed programme of construction, for instance, there'll be a lot more day-to-day metrics as to are things happening as the team expect them to be happening, working with our external parties, whoever they may be. So I think we can, I think picking up on the theme here, I think it would be good for us to explain the different levels of assessment that will be going on throughout the life of this immediate project in the acute. There'll be a lot of objectives, a lot of assessment, measurement, and how do we know this construction project is working to track. There'll be a lot of data on that. How do we, what happens after that? What's the process around benefits realisation? How do we know it's working then as per plan? And so I think we could possibly explain that in a different way, which is more accessible for everybody.
So that would be in the management case of the outline business case. So in the management case, you'll see that we've set out all of the different reporting that we're doing in order to demonstrate that we're on track within the programme and to make sure that we're staying within the project controls and programme controls as you would anticipate.
Mm-hmm. I think there's just as an example, if we can, and just to pick up Deputy Renov's issue, when you asked the question about is this informed by a workforce plan?
Yeah.
And we would expect to see that there's some specific objective around workforce and that there's some measures around workforce, and we don't actually see that contained within this OBC at the moment. So that's just as an example.
Yeah, no, that's a very good example. As you know, we've done a lot of work in the OBC on clinical modelling. It's been informed by a lot of dialogue with our clinical colleagues. We continually think about workforce strategy. We're at a point in time, the OBC is at a point in time, so I think you'd agree there's a lot of detail on the clinical modelling. And we've done a lot of thinking around the workforce and what it means in terms of the OBC.
So this is a business case, I suppose, for a capital build where we've had to demonstrate that it's affordable in terms of the taxpayer. That's the exercise we've done. I know we have colleagues in HCS who are working on the wider workforce plan, and obviously that they need to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to move on to Deputy Iyer.
Thank you, Chair. We'll move on to the economic case. The panel has reviewed the assumptions log set out within the economic case of the outline business case. However, these assumptions do not appear to refer to analysis with research or evidence to support the assumptions. Please, can you confirm that each assumption made within the economic case is supported by objective evidence, and can you provide an example of this?
I think it would be really helpful if you were able to point out the page on which you're talking about the assumptions so we can see the kind of generality of those.
I'm going to mention that because we're not allowed to say.
Yes.
Being careful not to closely reference it.
So if you just provide the page, that would give me an idea of the, I mean, what we do know is all of the capital costs have been generated on the basis of information available. So we have cost consultants working for the programme. Many of the assumptions that you see on the pages in relation to the capital costs will be brought through from their cost plan. Their cost plan is on the basis of databases of information of historic hospital programmes, as well as, good practice and good practice guides in terms of the costs of certain things. And it's on that basis that those capital costs have been prepared. So there absolutely is a solid base of evidence for all of the numbers, the capital numbers presented within the economic case.
And who has responsibility for the assumptions made about the capital cost?
It would depend on the nature of those assumptions. So generally, those capital costs have been derived from drawings or from other information that's available on the nature of the scheme in order to come up with what we anticipate the capital cost might be. Now, as we've said, there are lots of different components of the cost within the 710. Some of them relate to buildings, some of them relate to other items.
And have those assumptions been challenged and tested by anybody?
Well, you can imagine that there is lots of challenge within the programme team. We look at, I think that a key area of challenge is to be able to test anything that was, for example, in a capital cost plan with the supply chain. So there's been some testing of those numbers with the supply chain, for example, to make sure that they're correct. There'll be further testing as we move forward to make sure that the numbers that we have are correct numbers. There's also challenge within the team because we have a local quantity surveyor working with us as well as UK quantity surveyors who obviously have experience in healthcare. So they're able to challenge on any of the numbers that, for example, might be different because we're working in Jersey rather than in the UK. We also have a target value design process operating within the programme. So what that means is as we design things, we really try and have a continuous check of cost to make sure that, anything that's being drawn is within our cost envelope. So we've really, there's a lot of challenge within the team because you can imagine that, sometimes somebody might have a preference for a certain item, but the rest of the team, if it means that particular cost element goes out of the tolerance, then it would mean that we wouldn't be able to proceed with that. So yeah, there is lots of challenge. We obviously also have historic information on hospital projects from our previous incarnations that are also used in deriving some of those costs. So we are definitely looking at in the round.
For reference, it's page 52 to 54 of the outline business case, and it's the assumptions in those tables that you were questioning. That there wasn't supporting information.
Thank you. The panel has reviewed the quantifiable benefits highlighted in the economic case of the OBC. Please can you confirm whether there is additional information available, including metrics that have informed each of the quantifiable benefits?
So the quantifiable benefits we've already spoken about, haven't we, I think? In terms of additional information, is it more around the assumptions, the build-up of the
About the
assumptions?
strategies of,
The strategies of each of the benefits?
yes.
I think we've spoken earlier, haven't we, about the fact that what we've tried to do is make those the quantifiable benefits quite conservative in terms of the estimates. And the nature of those estimates will become more certain as they're realised over time. So we've got more information on the build-up of those if you wanted to have that to supplement the information that we've given you in the OBC.
Right, okay. Can you confirm to what extent the benefits set out in the economic case have followed the assurance of benefits realisation projects, supplementary guidance produced by the UK Infrastructure and Projects Authority?
No, we didn't follow that guidance.
You didn't. What was the reason for that?
Because, as we said, we took a very conservative view of the estimates of those benefits, and our view was that they would evolve over time.
Thank you. In relation to qualitative, i.e. non-quantifiable benefits, please can you provide more information about how these are measured and scored?
Measured and scored?
Yes. Because they do not appear to be set out within the outline business case. Or
How they were derived?
Can you confirm where it's documented?
Okay, so we've documented the benefits in the OBC, and we've set out the narrative for each of them. We've spoken about how they will be measured. I think that's from page 75 onwards. And then what we've talked about is the measurement of each of those, and then the baseline score of each of those. It's on page 70, 75 onwards.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass over to Marcus now.
Thank you, Chair. Please can you describe the steps being taken to implement the risk mitigations set out in the outline business case, project risk register, and the scoring used for these?
I think there's a risk register contained in the OBC, but it's fair to say that the risk framework that we have as a programme team in general is well developed. We follow the Government of Jersey framework for risk scoring, so it's in line with any other project or programme that you might see coming out of the Government of Jersey. In terms of how we track risks and then mitigations and actions, there are meetings monthly or bi-monthly at a programme and a project level, where each of the owners and the programme team in general review them, update the scoring, the mitigations and the actions on a regular basis.
Thank you. And who's managing the risks associated with phase one of the programme?
So ultimately, it's a responsibility of the team. So the programme director ultimately has the responsibility for the programme, but there's a wide set of stakeholders and parts of the team that are involved in it. So project managers take responsibility for their own once the project is in delivery, and then it rolls up into the various governance groups.
I think it's fair to say that in the outline business case, you'll see that, you know, a lot of the risk owners are assigned to be very generic as Government of Jersey. It's fair to say in our more detailed risk registers that exist within the programme, clearly we've got the best person or organisation to deal with the particular risk named against each of the risks.
So there's more detail that you're working
Yes,
to
yes.
than has been published.
Then has been published in the OBC, and obviously a risk, even a risk register would be a commercial document, and so that's what we've been very careful about.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The panel notes the absence of the numerical information within the outline business case, project risk register. Can you clarify why?
Do you mean the costing of the individual risks?
There's gaps.
So we have done an exercise on costing risks internally, because it's good practice. It is a very difficult and complex matter in terms of the modelling, but we have done one exercise this year, if that's, is that what you mean?
I'm not sure. I think, do you mean the numbers that are contained in the individual risk register?
Do you mean, oh,
Yeah, there should be, if there is not a number in each of the boxes, the one I have in front of me does have numbers, so perhaps there's been some sort of typo or issue.
no, I think it might be just, so from page 82, for example, programme affordability, that's got the scores in it, but if you come over the page, I think what it is that score from the previous page
Yes.
relates to all of the boxes, so I don't think they're gaps, it's more typographical, so I don't believe that they are
I
gaps.
think if I may, it may also be around what's quantified scoring. So
Yeah.
I think the panel has the same, you have team, but it's around the numerical quantification
Yeah.
of that. And as you mentioned, it could be time, it could be money, it could be anything that could be quantified to create a score. So I think that's where the question's getting at.
So it is back to costing the risk register.
So there is a costed risk register, and I think, as it says in the OBC, we're comfortable with that costed risk register as it stands.
Yeah, we did debate how to represent that costing within here, but in the end, we came down to the commerciality of that because it led on to some other numbers, but that exercise has been done.
Do you also have a delay-based risk register that infers the time delay for risks as well as the cost delay for risks? Because sometimes I presume different risks will be more relevant to a different type of risk, whether it be time or money.
So that's it. There's a whole matrix of different impacts. One of them is delay, one of it's cost, one of it's, there's reputational as well, obviously. So yes, all of those different matters
You've
are
quantified
considered.
those somewhere else?
So they are already quantified, I believe,
They
in the Government of Jersey guidance, and that helps you to come up with the scoring.
Thank you.
Please can you advise how previous lessons learned from work on previous hospital projects have been applied to improve risk management in relation to the current proposals?
So we run, as well as the risk register programme, we do run a lessons learned programme as well. We're just in the process of finishing that for 2024. So what we try and do is we take a whole host of lessons learned from various data sources, and then we ask ourselves those questions about whether we have learnt those lessons or not, and that comes up with a report for ourselves. And then in addition, we run a health check process on ourselves and ask ourselves the questions about our individual processes. So we have a lessons learned and a health check process. And in addition to that, there are various other parts of government that ask us the questions as well. So we have a regular dialogue with internal audit and the Risk and Audit Committee.
So perhaps not just hospital projects, but also maybe Cyril Markle House, for example?
Generally, yeah, we try and take as much learning as we can. So definitely we've had some dialogues about that. We have various forums that we can meet our GOJ colleagues, and we try and take advantage of those as much as possible because there are some good lessons to be learned, and we really want to try and make this a success. So that's a very important part of our governance framework.
And I guess historic Controller and Auditor General reports, things like that, a lot of those previous reporting has been taken into our governance projects and is probably now reflected in our project manual and programme manuals.
The HMT Green Book states that optimism bias is the proven tendency for appraisers to be optimistically biased about key project parameters, including capital costs and operating costs, project duration and resulting benefits delivery. Please can you advise how optimism bias within the outlined business case has been calculated?
So we've had a workshop in order to assess the optimism. Optimism bias really is a contingency. Some of our advisors might tell us that it's, where its origins lay, and obviously it's in relation to the fact that the project team might have a bit of groupthink. We might be naturally optimistic people that want to deliver. And so we do have contingencies that we've calculated in accordance with the HMT guidelines where they apply to Jersey. There's always some things that are a bit perplexing for us because they're not necessarily Jersey regulations or law, but where we could, we've applied them, and that's how we've generated the number that we have for optimism bias.
Outline business case and assurances. Please can you advise how you have sought assurances about the nature and extent of the information contained in the outline business case? For example, can you tell us when the outline business case was last updated?
So the outline business case followed on from the information update that was completed at the end of December. So we went through a period of updating it this year, and that update was completed in June or July this year.
And I think it's fair to say, as part of that process, you know, bearing in mind its commercial confidentiality, we tried to share it with a number of different parties in order that each of them were able to pass back their comment and we could update it accordingly. So we have sent it to various different colleagues across Government of Jersey, for example. We've asked senior members of our advisor groups, because obviously they see lots of outline business cases across their desk, for us to be able to have that. And of course, part of our assurance is the fact that we have EY working for us, who've not only delivered many outline business cases in their time, but also historic ones for Jersey, building on that knowledge that we already had.
Thank you. One final question on that. Please can you confirm whether any independent verification of the data and information used to inform the outline business case was sought?
So I suppose that's kind of answered in my previous question, insofar as we did try and seek assurance outside the team that what we had was correct, and obviously some of those people that we...
Where would you go for that?
Well, it was still within our advisor team because, some of our advisors, for example, would be engineers or would be architects, and so they have seen other such schemes. They would be aware of the kinds of information that we had and would be able to say whether what we'd provided would normally satisfy an outline business case or not.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I've got a question about the budget, Minister. In your letter to the panel dated 13th of September, it was noted that the funding in the proposed budget 2025 had risen from 52 million this year to 73 million next year, and it was related to anticipated activity in the following projects, including construction activities. Please can you clarify when the services to be delivered in each of the planned locations will be confirmed?
That's something I would have to hand over because I wouldn't carry that information around with me.
When you say services, do you mean clinical services? So I think that we have covered this, but I guess you're talking about in specifics in relation to the phase one.
In relation to the budget particularly, because obviously the increase in the budget.
Yeah, so I think we have covered that. I don't know if that's one you want us to go over that again in terms of Kensington Place and the Health Village.
It wasn't very clear about what services were going to be supplied from each location.
So each of those services are set out in the feasibility study and the strategic outline case in terms of that clustering of services that's been tested with clinical colleagues. We're working to that overarching brief. We understand that only certain parts of that will be delivered through this first phase, and I think we've said we'll be doing further work on the sites because things have slightly changed, and it's always right to review things, so we'll be continuing that work on.
I think the point of the question is to establish whether or not there is going to be duplication of services, whether services are going to change at Enid Kenno. What is the pattern? So how will, as a punter in the street, how will I know where to go for my healthcare? When are you going to be able to tell us that?
Well, I think we've... Oh, sorry, Minister.
No, you carry on. I mean, I thought we made it.
Where do I go for my outpatient appointments? When? What specialisms? It's that level of detail in terms of where things are actually going to be, because it will drive the workforce requirements and it will drive the budget for the departments as well.
Is this in relation to the spending of £72 million next year? Because it wouldn't have struck me that
I-
the budget was going to change
yeah.
in that period of time, to be honest with you.
So
You're talking now about messaging for the whole project as to where.
sorry, I'll clarify. So I think the question was in relation to the increase in expenditure that is being gathered. So what we're trying to understand is what will we get in service terms for that increase in expenditure?
But
So-
just from the panel side, that increase in expenditure isn't a change in what's provided. That's just a year-on-year phasing amount, isn't it? It's just
Correct.
knowing that next year the project will spend more than this year.
So originally, we are optimistic people. That's why we've got optimism bias. We wanted to give ourselves the opportunity to do as much as we possibly could this year. So originally, I think that there was an allocation to this year. We've accepted now that we'll be able to do less overall. That less will not affect the final date because, I know that the panel will know about critical paths and where they lie in projects, and some of that work was outside the critical path. We've achieved the work that's inside the critical path, and so overall timelines are not affected. However, there is some work that, we would have liked to be able to deliver that road that I've talked about sooner. But we haven't done it, but we're getting onto it. And I guess that was part of the deferred expenditure from year on year. But it's not an increase overall. We're still within the 710.
So the fact that you're doing less this year will mean that there'll be a considerable carried forward from the 52 million allocated this year to next year.
Well, part of that is to cover those commitments that we do hope that we will be able to make before the end of this year as well. So obviously we're not allowed to commit anything this year that we wouldn't have expenditure for. So naturally that will be accounted for in that way anyway.
Thank you.
I wanted to come at the end just back to one point about political accountability. You have overall ministerial accountability for the project. In terms of monitoring how the project is going, particularly around spend, how do you assure yourself that it is performing as it should?
I think I get a financial update virtually weekly. We go through the numbers, and I'm at the end of the day, one has to have confidence in the capacity of the team, and I have. And I get those constant updates, and unless somebody's telling me an untruth, I take it as read that we're on line to deliver exactly as intended.
The Treasury Minister told us that she didn't see it as her job to monitor the spend of the project. That means that it is down to you to assure yourself of that. I mean, reassurance is fine. That's when somebody just tells you that they're happy. How do you make sure that you've got the evidence that it is actually performing?
Well, I haven't gone and checked up on anybody. If you're suggesting that I should, I think that's rather strange. I think over the course of 2 years, I've been involved in the commercial world, and it does require an element of trust, and I do have that trust here. And if I'm going to be called up for not going and checking on people, perhaps you'd advise me as what I need to do. At the moment, I'm working on the trust of the information that I'm provided very, very regularly.
So it's the information that provides you with the assurance.
Absolutely.
And
And the integrity of the team, as I say. I don't think they'd appreciate it if I sort of set somebody on them to go and check on them. If I'm supposed to do that as in my capacity, then
I don't think we're suggesting that you should be checking whether the team are fibbing to you. That's not what we're suggesting at all. What we're trying to do
say is I'm comfortable with the information that I get, the regularity of that information, and the integrity of the people giving me that information. So overall, very comfortable.
We do have a question from a member of the public to finish off with.
Enjoy.
We did invite members of the public. And I wonder, you're all on the edge of your seats now. What's the public?
Over to.
Do it as a roulette.
It'd be you.
I'm hoping it was my mum.
Marcus is going to reveal all. It is a new subject.
I've just got to tell you, we're 2 minutes after time. We may choose not.
topic is known to me, but I have not prompted him. Please can you advise why the current plans for the new healthcare facilities do not include fresh food production and catering? Can you confirm whether the design plans for the Overdale acute facility allow for fresh food production and catering to take place in the future?
Right, and no, it doesn't allow, and as I understand it, doesn't allow the facility for the creation of food on site. And that's not something we'd be looking to do. Though we have had various discussions about the food that will be used in the longer term.
Is the facility at St Peter's capable of looking after the...
Yeah, because the output would be, required output wouldn't differ greatly from where we are. And I think if we move from one model to another, it would be to another model where the food was sourced elsewhere.
That answers Mr Jay's question then. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, we have to finish here because another panel is due in. And thank you very much for your time with us. Sorry to those of you who only had to sit through and listen. I hope you found it edifying. And I'm sure, in the case of the Minister, I'll be seeing you again shortly for another hearing.